Welcome to Leaders in the Industry, a podcast giving insight on current hot topics in the field of finance, IT, marketing, HR, healthcare, asset management, and the financial industry, featuring well-known experts. From leaders, for leaders. Brought to you by Richmond Events Switzerland.
My name is Carlo Hanslik, Director at Richmond Events, and today we have invited Matthew Griffin, who will be the keynote speaker at the first Richmond Cybersecurity Forum and the Richmond IT Forum in 2024, and we will talk about the future of cyber, trends, and technology. At first, it's my pleasure to quickly introduce Matthew Griffin. Matthew worked for more than 20 years in senior roles within companies including IBM, Dell, and Atos. He has a full library of topics he can talk about, whether it's things such as the future of cyber, including digitization and post-digital, IT, R&D, supply chains, technology transformation, globalization, and then the future of almost every technology, which for that one you might like to check out his latest emerging technology codex. Matthew is a futurist and CEO of the 311 Institute, so sit back, enjoy, and let's go. Hi Matthew, welcome to our Richmond Events podcast. It's a pleasure for us to have you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. Matthew, it will be your first time speaking at a forum of Richmond Events in Switzerland next year. What are you looking forward to the most?
So I know this is probably going to sound a little bit kitsch, that's it, but actually meeting people and networking. Now, the reason for that is I always love meeting experts and doers in every field, because even though I've got a lot of stories and experience and I can talk about the battles that I've actually had in a variety of different formats and places, there's always people with other points of view and everything else. So I'm really looking forward to actually hearing stories from a lot of the other people who are going to be attending and actually comparing, what they've been doing with what I've been doing, with what I've been seeing, and then, stitching all of that together and ultimately coming out with probably a new viewpoint on things, which is always welcome.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think this will be very exciting for you as well to meet our audience. Let's talk a little bit more about you becoming who you are today, a futurist and foresight expert, author and founder of the 311 Institute. How did you get to this point in your career and what keeps you inspired?
So my background academically is actually science, so marine biology and oceanography. I fell into technology at a very young age, so started working for distribution companies. Then I ended up working for companies like EMC, where I was managing enterprise sales divisions. Then went from there basically to IBM. So at IBM, I headed up what we call the IBM PSNS business. So that's public safety and national security. So that's the Five Eyes, national security agencies, global police forces, and so on and so forth. Did a lot of work basically in that particular space, set up a lot of innovation forums for national security community, because when we have a look at NatSec, inevitably they're not too interested in what's already here. They really want to see not just what's next, but what comes after the thing that's next, so that they can remain competitive on the global stage. Now, after that, I headed up a whole variety of different commercial and enterprise business units within IBM. Left there and then was global head of channel sales for Atos, where I headed up their global cloud division. And then eventually came out, founded the 311 Institute. But sort of back to the question about foresight and futures, one of the things that made me quite uncomfortable working for a lot of the large technology giants is, while it was always assumed that they had this ability to see the future, understand the future, adapt to the future, and then go off and lead the future, generally, that's not the case. If we have a look at IBM, for example, IBM saw cloud computing coming, but ultimately got smashed by it. They lost almost half their market value over a number of years and so on and so forth. And really, they're still recovering. Same with a lot of other organizations. So during that particular time of my career, I saw around 250,000 people in the technology sector being made redundant because the companies hadn't been able to see the changes, understand the changes, and then adapt to those changes in their marketplaces. Now, through my work with the national security community, for example, I understood that if you really want to understand what the future could look like, we have the possible, probable, preferable, and even preposterous futures, then you need to have really three kind of very, very high level viewpoints. What are the problems that we're trying to solve? How do we solve them? Which is generally always a combination of technology, which is why I follow over 600 emerging technologies today. Wow. And you can see those in the books that I write and the codexes that I distribute and publish. But then as a futurist and a foresight expert, we really then want to understand what are the impacts of those particular things, and when are these new things, these new products and services that people have created, when are they really going to affect our marketplace or the things that we care about? And when we have a look at that third piece of the jigsaw puzzle, the when, that's very reliant on things like regulations, liability being sorted out, network effects, culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of things there. So by over a period of time, by pulling together all these different strands that allow us to see the future, understand what it could look like, should look like, might look like, et cetera, et cetera, I worked with a lot of enterprise companies, and I still do, to help them understand what was coming, understand why it might be important to their business and to the people within their business, and then create the strategies to adapt, cope, and lead, basically, as the world inevitably changes. And me, working with some of these technology companies that I used to work for and also compete against, now we're in a situation where the companies can see what's coming, adapt to what's coming, but crucially, from my perspective, they aren't making people redundant in the same way. Because if you can see what's coming, and if you can adapt, and you've got the people and the processes in place, you can take the people who are already within your organization with you into this new future, rather than kicking them to the curb. So I do tend to feel that sometimes I've kind of come full circle, albeit outside of the corporate machine that I used to be in.
Yeah, very interesting journey. Regarding your research, which topics are you most concerned with at the moment?
So, I feel like that's a little bit of a loaded question. There's quite a lot.
Yeah, let's now it short.
Yeah, let's start unpacking it.
On point.
Now, yeah. So when we talk about concern, inevitably a lot of the conversations that people are having at the moment really surround artificial intelligence. Let's face it. Not just generative AI, but artificial intelligence as it is, artificial general intelligence, as Microsoft said recently that we are starting to see sparks of, and so on and so forth. Now, when we have a look at technology and really any innovation, technology is this blank slate. So when we talk about concern, arguably, I'm actually not that concerned about the technology. What I'm concerned about is how humans, and then ultimately the technologies themselves, which we can discuss, actually evolve, develop, and get deployed. If we have a look at artificial intelligence, globally, 75% of younger generations are now worried about the future. And it's not just because we're telling people that AI is going to do one of two things to you, not both. We say AI is going to take your job and or kill you, not necessarily in that order. So what we have today is 75% of people in younger generations are worried about the future. Then we layer on climate change and all the other things that are actually happening. Global protests, war, supply chain snarl-ups, hyperinflation, et cetera, et cetera. But older generations are also, around 60% of older generations are actually concerned and worried about the future as well. So from a concern perspective, I could actually twist this almost back on its head and say, what I'm concerned about most is that increasingly people are seeing the future as this thing that is a dystopia, this thing that is to worry about, this thing that is not for them, that's not built for them, that is dangerous and uncertain. And when we talk about the narratives that are being spun around the future, increasingly people look at the negatives, the stuff that the news networks tell us we should be concerned about, or that they want us to be concerned about because that's what sells the papers in the first place. But when we actually have a look at the flip side of these technologies, and we can talk about cyber. So cyber, I see as a subset of artificial intelligence, especially as we start looking into the future, for a variety of reasons. I know people might not like me saying a subset, but there's a good reason for that. AI is a general purpose technology. That's the granddaddy. That's the umbrella tech. But when we actually have a look at how we're actually using technology for good, we're using artificial intelligence to accelerate children's learning sixfold, to find, cure, and treat diseases that were previously incurable, to reduce the energy consumption of hyperscale data centers by 20% or more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm more concerned about the negative narratives that are being spun about the future. Because if as humanity, we see that we actually have the ability to create a better future, a good future, then that's what we focus on. There was a little saying a while ago that I came across, and it said, people who are marching into the darkness will always be upset and depressed. They will lock themselves in their homes and their basements and they will never come out. But people who are marching into the light, where there is hope for the future, will do all that they can to try to bring that future about. And so what I try to do is, yes, we talk about the concerns because we have to be realistic. But yes, we should also talk about how we, as a society, as a technocratic culture, come together to solve these challenges together, so that these concerns aren't as all-consuming as they should be or used to be.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of to-do, regulations-wise,
definitely a lot
education-wise. What are your predictions for the future of information technology for companies, for teams, for leaders, given the current situation?
Yeah. So at the moment, if we sort of take it to a rather basic level, everyone talks about, becoming a digital native, digital transformation this, digital transformation that. Now, with companies like Accenture often talk about post-digital. Now, increasingly, once an organization is a digital organization, they then generally start on the path to become what I call an algorithmic organization. And this is where we're seeing algorithms increasingly embedded throughout the front office, the back office, from the top of the house to the bottom of the house. Now, when we actually have a look at overall predictions, the fact of the matter is that technology is generally getting more powerful, more capable, more ubiquitous. It's getting cheaper, if not free. It's helping to democratize and decentralize various services that originally you would have had to have gone to a hospital for example. If we have a look at things like telehealth, telesurgery, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, we've got these very big umbrella changes that apply to almost every sector and every service that we talk about and that we care about. Now, as we start having a look at the future, the big conversations are obviously to do with artificial intelligence and its impact on global culture, business and society, the workforce, companies as well, product development, all these kinds of different things, cybersecurity. And so inevitably, we're moving to a point where the vast majority of companies, irrespective of the sector that they live in, are becoming technology companies. If you take a company like Volkswagen, for example, are they a car company or are they increasingly a technology company? They're writing more software and more code than ever before, and as vehicles start driving themselves to different degrees, we often talk about cars now being software on rails, smartphones with a passenger seat. So increasingly, as we start having a look at this future, the future is going to become increasingly fast-paced. It's already fast, but faster. Yeah. It's going to become more complex. It's going to become more difficult for organizations to actually see things. They're not going to have as much time as they used to digest the things they see, discuss the things they see, and develop a strategy to counter maybe or adapt to the things they see. So the cycles of disruption are now getting faster and faster and faster. And from a human perspective, if we sort of bring it back to the business professionals and the business side of things, the business leaders that I work with are increasingly concerned that they don't know what they don't know. They are increasingly concerned about skills shortages, technology-led disruption, changing customer behaviors, and so on and so forth. And the vast majority of companies are now struggling to really know what they should be looking at, how they should be thinking about things, especially against these different sort of backdrops that we see, and then what they should do about it within their businesses so that their businesses are safe, protected, and eventually prosperous in the future.
Yeah, so protection, reducing risks, preparing for security. What are the current challenges in cyber and IT security? And what are your tips to conquer with them?
So, some of the obvious challenges that we have is we have an increasingly digital society that's increasingly connected. So I'm going to state the obvious, but then I'm going to move to the unobvious things. Mm-hmm. Now, when we have a look at the obvious, increasingly every single business is becoming a digital native, partly because that's where the market is driving them to. Secondly, once organizations are digital natives, they can identify new markets and they can move into those markets quicker, which is where we see the rise of super apps and multi-sided business models. So, that's all that. But, when we start having a look at organizations that are digitally transforming, we've got about 4 billion people on the planet who are now connected. In the next 5 to 7 years, we will have potentially everybody on the planet who wants to be connected, because we have low Earth orbit satellite-based systems that can now connect everyone everywhere on Earth. So increasingly, we live in this digital and connected society, but connected people and connected things. Now, when we have a look at things like IoT, we move from regular IoT to artificial intelligence at the edge, which means we have smart IoT. We have huge amounts of data that are being collected. We have IoT being embedded into OT, the OT stack of organizations, tech stacks. And when we have a look at sort of that status quo, everybody kind of knows that status quo. But from a cyber perspective, we're already seeing the weaponization of generative artificial intelligence, where we've had generative AI writing new ransomware. I was with a major global card company about 2 to 3 months ago in Spain. And while we had one of the US Federal Reserve's top cyber dogs there talking about digital skimming and all this kind of stuff, I was using Google Bard to fundamentally rewrite digital skimming software and obfuscate it so that it couldn't be picked up by detection systems. So on the one hand, some of the non-obvious risks that we're seeing increasingly perpetuate themselves are creating cyber weapons is increasingly easy because we have increasingly advanced artificial intelligence that frankly can just do the programming for us. Yeah. Even if we don't use those tools, the dark web has all kind of downloadable exploits, as well as cybercrime as a service help desks that we can just tap into and ask, I've got this, I want to attack them. What do I do? When we have a look at the global sort of serious organized crime community as it stands, it's estimated that is now an $8 trillion revenue industry growing at about 19% compound.
Wow.
When we have a look at just the cyber aspect of serious organized crime, in the past 4 years, it's gone from an estimated $600 billion, in terms of revenues, to about $1.2 to $1.4 trillion. So when we have a look at the evolution of risks, cyber criminals everywhere are increasingly cottoning on that they can use and exploit these powerful new artificial intelligence tools to do no good.
Yeah.
However, going further down the rabbit hole, we've already seen examples of the first fully autonomous, self-evolving, self-replicating polymorphic malware that is incredibly difficult to catch and pretty much state-level stuff. Mm-hmm. So as AI gets to the point where it can help cyber criminals write new ransomware programs and code and exploits and all that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. we're also getting to the point where AI is able to evolve its own code, replicate itself to create children AIs. And we've seen these with reputable companies like Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, Facebook and Meta as they are, as well as Baidu. And when we really start looking down this robo-hacker route, it is increasingly easy to see how tools like AutoGPT could eventually go full auto, where someone just types into it, create an ever-evolving piece of malware that does X, Y, and Z, and it goes and creates it, thumps it into the web, and never ever comes back to base. So not only do we see the rise of hybrid security operations, human plus AI, we're also seeing the rise increasingly at the edges, and this is really at the edges. This is in the labs, this is in the corners of the dark web and everything else. Increasingly, we're starting to see the rise of fully autonomous artificial intelligences that are able to, in Uber's case, with open-ended artificial intelligences, identify a problem to solve, hack into a system, whatever system it is. But then with open-ended AIs, which are quite an interesting sort of area to explore if people haven't heard of them, can then try to figure out, if I'm being commanded to hack something, how do I hack it? So these open-ended AIs will create their own problems and then solve their own problems. And they can scan millions of lines of code to find proof of vulnerabilities and then say, right, well, if I want to exploit that, I create this code. So if we think that if we think cyber is difficult today, bearing in mind a lot of insurance companies are now starting to yank their cyber cover, which is another big problem that businesses are actually having around the world, especially ransomware cover. We haven't seen anything yet.
But I think that the whole bunch which you stated now, this is all like the so-called new threats as well. And very quickly, 1, 2, 3 tips on that, how to conquer with that, with the rising AI and it's coding its own ransomware. How to stop that? How to work with that? How to protect against
so this is a sort of problem I've been working on for really the past, for a very long time, really for years, but I've sort of put it more front of mind over the past few months. Now, when we have a look at the evolution of the weaponization of artificial intelligence, where humans weaponize it and then eventually it weaponizes itself, against particular constructs, parameters, and everything else. It doesn't just do it itself. There needs to be an intervention somewhere, human or machine. We often talk about finding ways to control the downsides of AI or cyber. Now, when we have a look at companies like Darktrace, a little while ago, they came out basically with their concept of the autoimmune system. Yeah. Because with Darktrace's philosophy, they said, well, yeah, the human immune system is very, very good at identifying things that shouldn't be in the human body that maybe they've never seen before, like a new kind of malware, new bug, and then trying to figure out what is it and how do I kill it. Yeah. So with companies like Darktrace, they kind of develop these concepts of autoimmune systems where an artificial intelligence-based system could firstly discover something it's never seen before, and then start stripping apart its code base to understand what is it, what's its purpose, what's it going after, and how, then quarantine it, and then how do we kill it? Now, as we start going more full auto, because inevitably we will have to go full auto, we're seeing that basically in the US with the ICAD system, which is currently protecting 400 tier one United States banks. It's a semi-autonomous, should we say, firewall-like defense system at the moment that the NSA plugs into. Yeah. But the ICAD system has been designed by the Department of Homeland Security to ultimately support, not necessarily go, but to support fully autonomous operation. Now, when we start bringing artificial intelligence together with quantum computing, we get quantum artificial intelligence. And this happens over the next sort of 3-ish years. But one of the sort of more interesting areas that I've been looking at is if we as humans believe that we are going to have problems sufficiently identifying weaponized AI, countering weaponized AI, and understanding its purpose and the risks associated with it, then what happens when we start bringing quantum artificial intelligence into the mix from the defender's perspective? Now, with quantum artificial intelligence, we don't really have many stats about it, but we do know that quantum computers will be able to crack about 70% of the world's encryption because they can run everything in parallel, and they can crack it in a few minutes. Yeah. So quantum computers are able to process calculations that would have taken a traditional supercomputer 3.5 billion years, in some cases in minutes. So what happens when we start using quantum artificial intelligence and directing it against new cybersecurity threats to help us understand what they are, why they are, the risks they pose, the targets they're after, and then try to create solutions? Bearing in mind that even when we have a look at human proteins and vaccines, quantum computers have already helped us reach the point where we can create a new vaccine in about 7 minutes.
Okay, wow.
So I think that fusion for me of what happens when we supercharge AI with quantum, and there are other technologies as well, but staying simple. What happens when we supercharge AI, the AI that the defenders have, with quantum computing, and start finding new ways to identify things that we want to identify and defend against those things.
Okay. So, some very, very exciting parts you have touched now. A little bit scary sometimes as well, but therefore we are very delighted to welcome you next year to Switzerland on our stages. Last question. What do you think makes a good leader?
So that's a great question. So I think that there are a number of things that make a great leader. But I suppose basically picking one, listening has really got to be the top one. But it's all very well saying listening. So great leaders are people who will listen to anyone almost about anything, because they are open-minded and they're receptive to not just people, but new ideas, new ways of working and things. But really, a good leader basically has to be able to listen, but then they also have to have curiosity. Curiosity about what's going on, whether it's today, the future, what people are doing, what other businesses are doing, whatever it happens to be. They've got to be curious. They've got to have an explorer's mindset. But then they also have to have the will and really the remit. If it's a public limited company from shareholders, they really have to have the will to act, but act in the interest of their companies, the people that they employ, the planet. And then when we talk about shareholders, the relationship between leaders who are now starting to change how capitalism works, for example, moving from traditional capitalism that is actually seen people used as commodities and the planet used as a commodity to more ethical capitalist models. These leaders also, when it comes to changing and embracing the future, they have to be able to stand up to the disbelievers, the doubters, the investors, and say, we are doing this thing because it is the right thing to do, even if it's not the most profitable thing to do. So they've got to have backbone. So as I say, not one thing, multiple things, but listening, curiosity, and then really the willingness and ability to act and act as air cover for the organization against people who would rather that the organization acts in a traditional way by maybe cutting people, cutting operating costs, narrowing the saw, narrowing the focus on particular markets to the detriment of all else, whether it's the future or whether it's existing markets.
All right. Matthew, thank you very much for your time, for sharing some insights with us. We are really looking forward to welcoming you next year at our forums here in Switzerland and to listen and learning more from you about the future.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to meeting everybody as well. So, and also listening and exploring the future together with everybody. So it'll be a blast.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
This was Leaders in the Industry, brought to you by Richmond Event Switzerland, organising one-of-a-kind strategic business forums for executives since 1990. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Spotify, and richmondevents.ch to stay up to date with our podcast and news.